interview, and now look, there are hundreds of thousands of us, or more. But he associates this with the educational work that he and other preachers did, but of course, it's also with the kind of work that Islamic NGOs were doing in those neighborhoods. So this is, here we can talk about infrastructures of these groups, and of course I've just touched briefly on the infrastructures of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now we can, and these Islamists, these Salafists adapted to the new or the changing socioeconomic context. We can also argue that the Muslim Brotherhood is capable of doing the same kind of adaptation today when they are under siege or besieged with the assault of by the military security apparatus following the coup of July 3rd in 2013. Now, okay, I just want to move away from a discussion of the Islamist landscape to talk about actually what I call the infrastructure of action or mobilization in the everyday. And then just finish by reflecting then where do Islamists fit into this or link, how do they link up with infrastructures of action in the everyday. So I want to move beyond Islamist politics, as I said, to consider popular mobilization, engagement and participation in the Arab uprisings. And I do so with the aim of elucidating the framework for thinking about the terms in which Islamists of various strands insert themselves into the political, in the broad sense of the term. And how am I doing with time?
It's about 45 minutes from the beginning.
Okay, so
you have time.
So you are no doubt familiar with different accounts of the causes and motivations of the Arab uprisings. Can you hear me? So I just want to kind of outline the contours of some prevalent accounts or readings of the uprisings. And one prevalent readings that was made popular through the media and some scholarly accounts is that the uprisings are a middle class affair. That uprisings were led by the educated youth of middle class backgrounds, the internet users, the media savvy, social media savvy, middle class activists. I think that this account, and I've kind of written a number of articles in which I dispute this account and say that it leaves out important social forces that actually were central to the revolutionary uprising. It leaves out the popular classes, and of these popular classes, particularly the inhabitants of informal neighborhoods of large cities. So the focus on Tahrir and the mobilization in Tahrir, in fact, edits out what was happening in different parts of the city. And actually also who was going to Tahrir. And there are two things that I just want to draw your attention to here. One, that it wasn't just purely middle class, that many of the marchers and protesters came out of lower middle class, popular neighborhoods of the city. Places like Bula al-Dakrur, which I've done a lot of work on in the 2000s, and my ethnographic work in political life in Cairo's New Quarters is actually from Bula al-Dakrur. Now Bula al-Dakrur, this quarter, which is in the west, it's in Giza, but in kind of west of Cairo, and it's a lower middle class to poor neighborhoods of the city with a huge population. One of the main processions on 25th of January came out of Bula al-Dakrur in coordination with the activists who called for the demonstration of the 25th of January 2011. Now, of course, this shows that the activists were very conscious of the importance of popular neighborhoods and their participation, and in fact, the demonstration and a march came out of Bula al-Dakrur that was large in numbers and was crucial to the success of that first day when there were not as many people. That first day, I think the estimates is about 80,000 people showed up by the end of the day in Tahrir before being chased away by the security forces. Now, but not only was there mobilization that was coordinated by the activists, but actually these neighborhoods had their own marches and processions from the first day. So other neighborhoods, I've interviewed activists from other neighborhoods or residents of other neighborhoods who talked about organizing their own processions. So places like Ain Shams, Matareya, and so on. But what is also important is to consider the action that was taking place in these neighborhoods. The most important was the assault on police stations. We have 99 police stations were burned on January 28, 2011. Of these 99, I can confirm that at least 25 were in popular neighborhoods of the Greater Cairo region. Burning down of police station, clashes with the police, and also burning down of central security cars. Now, this action was integral to the revolution to the extent that it was a way of neutralizing the police. It would have not been possible for the activists to occupy Tahrir Square and to keep the occupation if the police was not chased away from the police stations, popular neighborhoods, and stopped their mobilization, the control of or the neutralization of central security forces. This happened through the action that took place in places like Matareya, Ain Shams, Bula Dakrur, and so on, these popular neighborhoods of the city. Now, these places are important because actually these are the same places that we see Islamist demonstration, what is called the pro-Muslim Brotherhood demonstration going on following the coup of July 2013. So these are the same areas where we see mobilization, continuous mobilization and demonstration. But do we then assume that actually from that these mobilizations are only pro-Muslim brothers, only Islamist mobilizations, and or actually can we link the opposition that happened during the revolutionary uprisings, during the January 28th and following that in those neighborhoods, and then that is happening today. Now I would want to suggest that the opposition, the expression of this opposition and the mobilization that happened in those early days of the revolution were the expression of oppositional politics to government, to a very oppressive government, and particularly to the expression of conflictual relations that had developed between ordinary citizens and agents and agencies of government, and particularly the police, over a long time. And I talk about this quite a bit in my work, and because of time I will not go into a lot of details, but I want to say in very brief terms that it was this interaction with agents and agencies of government, with the police, that was formative of the oppositional subject that performed during the revolution. So that the revolutionary subject that came out, clashed with the police, occupied squares and so on, was partly formed in interaction with agencies and agents of government, and particularly with the police. Now, I think these same subjects are the ones who, some, sympathize and join the demonstrations that are labeled pro-Muslim Brotherhood or Muslim Brotherhood demonstration. So when we look into why is Matareya, this is one of the neighborhoods in the east and the northeast of Cairo, for instance, is for months after July 2013, was having demonstration every single weekend. And if you look at YouTube, you will see actually the strength and intensity of some of these demonstrations and the clashes with the police. Some of it was quite violent, with live bullets fired on demonstrators. I've spoken to some people from these neighborhoods, and the picture is much more complex than that. It's not just pro-Muslim Brotherhood. So I'm told that, for instance, in Matareya, it's Salafis also come out in these demonstrations. Now, Salafis are not one group. We know that one of the Salafi groups are pro-military and pro the existing regime, El Noor Party, and its social precursor, or the group, the religious group that is associated with, which is the Salafi called Dawah Salafiyya from Alexandria. Their preachers and the actual party have expressed a very strong support of Sisi and of the coup, and they've expressed anti-Muslim Brotherhood. Quite a 180-degree change from the position when the Muslim Brothers were in government. However, there are other Salafis who have expressed an anti-coup position and have express sympathies and support as a kind of support of legitimacy, legality, and so on. So we actually don't have a single Salafi position, and so some have been active in these demonstrations. But also active in these demonstrations are youth, who are not necessarily sympathetic with the Muslim Brothers, but are anti-government and particularly anti the coercive apparatus and the police and the continuing arrests and so on. So the mobilization that we're seeing is grounded in greater conflicts, in a longer history, and a much more complex social structure than it being just Islamist politics or anti-Islamist politics. And therefore, I think the question for us is, what is the link between Islamist politics and popular politics? We need to understand where they converge and where they diverge, and also their social grounds and their infrastructures. What makes them makes it possible for popular politics to be contentious and expressed in contentious terms, and how this links up with Islamist politics when they're contentious or not. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and perhaps we can move on to discussion.
Okay. Are there any questions? Remarks, questions?
So I can just ask. In your presentation, if you are discussing that the Islamist, the term of Islamism is in a broader sense is everywhere, and every ordinary Muslims become suddenly an political Islamist somehow in a broader sense. But isn't there a difference between this political subjectivity and also a kind of social subjectivity? Because if you look at in Turkey, in Egypt, or in Tunisia, or in Algeria, also in Europe, most of the time, most young generation, there is a rupture between these political figures and also this utopia, Islamist utopia, and they express another identity which is not linked directly to this political subjectivity. I think in your presentation we touched too much about this political Islamist, but somehow I think there are some Muslims which are not which cannot be that cannot be counted in this definition, I think.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if this is on.
Yeah, this.
Yeah, okay. I'm not saying that all Muslim activism is Islamist politics at the moment. I mean, depending on, not all Muslims who are politically active are Islamist. I still kind of use my old definition of what Islamist politics is. It's about invoking signs and symbols, deploying signs and symbols from this Islamic discursive tradition in the political sphere. Okay, and in doing that, there could be a redefinition of an act of redefinition or reconstruction of Islamic tradition. Okay, in the process. So drawing on Islamic tradition to articulate positions in the political sphere, but in the process also could be. But I also think that the social activism that deploys Islam feeds into the political, in the broad sense of the political that I've just talked about. That the political is not just about government. So if, for instance, this kind of social activism that is grounded in Islam as a discursive tradition, different construction of this discursive tradition, end up being transformative of power relations in the family, gender, and so on. I don't see this as a less political, and I see this as a part of the political project. Yeah. So the cultural politics is a kind of a politics, and we need to see what its impact and implications.
You explained how the Muslim Brotherhood had a broad popular basis in Egypt. Do you know how the situation was in Syria before the uprising started?
Yeah, I actually happened to be in Syria during the uprising. I was doing field work, and of course I've done quite a bit of field work previously in Syria. And the question of how much popular support the Muslim Brothers would have had is a very difficult question to answer, because you know that until the uprising, and probably until now, there was a law that made membership of the Muslim Brotherhood punishable by death. Okay, you know, so nobody in their right mind would say I'm a Muslim Brotherhood. You know, and we know that following the events of Hama, most of the people who would have self-declared to be Muslim Brothers had left, or even prior to the events of Hama, many had left. But yet, in the 2000s, early 2000s, when I was doing field work there, is people with Islamic leaning who are still co-opted and integrated by in the government, who would not be counted on the Muslim Brotherhood, were opining that about 25% of the population would have had sympathies. In that, they were trying to say, oh, they don't have much support actually. You know, they're considered. That's what was thought about. But okay, now I think what we need to think about is the support for different forms of Islamic identity in Syria, and to what extent that could converge with the Muslim Brotherhood. And so in the 2000s, we do see growing, and even prior to that, growing expressions of piety among the Sunni middle classes. Not necessarily expressing, I mean, to go back to what Dr. Khan was saying, not necessarily expressing narrow political position, you know, not necessarily saying we want an Islamic state or a project of state, but we can interpret this as a certain construction of identity that would have a political implications. So that some of the expressions of piety among the Sunni Damascene middle class, upper middle class families, to some extent were also expression of distinction from the dominant Alawis in government, okay? So that when these well-off, organized religious activities, kind of rituals, one of the things that that was talked about was the organization of Mawlid, by Mawlid as kind of a religious festivity, social religious activity, which are held to celebrate various things, could be weddings, success, and whatever. They would have religious figures coming, doing Quranic readings, sometimes prominent sheikhs attending. And I was told by some of my informants, but these events would definitely